Hello everyone and welcome to the third week, the third module of the University Studies for Student Veterans Facilitator Engagement, within which we are going to turn our collective attention toward the sixth and final module of the University Studies curriculum, Navigating Campus Culture. This is a single module this week, so hopefully you'll have some time to really dig in, navigate the module, engage with as many of the materials as you can, and I'm thinking that you'll find them useful. This is a crucial module for the curriculum, even though it comes last. Last but not least, as they say. And the reason it's last is in some ways that's sort of where there was room for it. You know, I knew I needed to start with mindset. I needed to get students on board with the notion that their intelligence and talent could be grown and developed like a muscle with effort and good strategies. I needed them to get on board with that worldview, to at least know about it and hopefully adopt the idea that their capacities and their abilities and their aptitudes could be grown. And once they sort of believed in their own ability to grow, then they could move more productively through the rest of the curriculum. I then wanted to jump immediately into the skills material because the truth is that most students who approach this curriculum, they need help. You know, either they need help because they're in distress or they're struggling with something, they need help because they're feeling overwhelmed, or they need help because they're ready to enhance or optimize their performance. And what they want is skills. What they want is strategies. What they want is take-homes that they can apply to their study practice immediately to begin either managing distress or enhancing their performance. And so that's why those 4 skills modules come immediately after the mindset and metacognition module. But I didn't feel comfortable stopping there. I knew that we needed to round out the curriculum with a conversation about culture, because ultimately the transition from active military service to the college classroom is a cultural transition. And so I knew that we needed to really sit down for a minute in this curriculum and really talk about culture, talk about what cultural transition looks like, and how best to navigate it. Now, you know, we do spend a lot of time in this curriculum talking about academic skills and the demands of the curriculum, the academic curriculum. But in some ways, you know, there is an additional resource on our campuses that is established already that can help students with academic skill acquisition, and that is the faculty, right? When a student says to me that they're struggling in a particular course or they want to enhance their performance in a particular academic course, I always tell them that there's nobody better in the whole world to help them do that in most cases than the member of the faculty or the instructor who has created and is teaching that course. That is the person who can really help you think about how best to approach the course and how to enhance your performance. And so you know, and faculty are not generally trained as learning specialists. They're not usually trained formally in learning strategies or study skills. You know, they're content experts at the end of the day, but as part of that content expertise, they're often experts in their own courses. And so students can seek these forms of help from the faculty as well as resources like this. But I think the curriculum that we don't always address in as satisfactory a way, the curriculum that we don't always address as explicitly, is the hidden curriculum on college campuses. The sort of the web of meaning, the sort of the mass of ways of speaking, ways of behaving, ways of acting and interacting that sort of surround the academic curriculum. And that constitute essentially the culture of a college campus. All of the million unspoken norms that generate culture, all of the ways of doing things, all of the sort of processes and procedures, rules and regulations, both explicit and implicit, that create culture. Another way to think about the hidden curriculum is how it all works. Right? How does this whole thing called a college or a university operate? The academic curriculum is just one piece of that, but the hidden curriculum is really everything else. And I think that, navigating this hidden curriculum is challenging for students in general, and particularly challenging for our military connected students, because in military environments, the kinds of environments where these students have been socialized in their young adult and adulthood, culture, I think, in general, processes, procedures, rules, and regulations are more visible. There are forms of organization and structure in military environments in general that are usually more overt, more explicit, more visible, and audible, right? These processes and procedures are rendered visible and audible in a variety of ways by a variety of people. And so, what that creates is a culture in the military where, in general, people are pretty clear on how things work, what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to do it, when you're supposed to do it. These things are largely prescribed, and there's not usually a whole lot of gray area about how things are supposed to work and how day-to-day business is supposed to operate. And the other thing, of course, is military cultures are sort of self-regulating to the extent that, if you do step out of line, if you do transgress somehow, there's usually no shortage of people who are prepared to alert you to that fact, number one, and help you figure out how not to do it again. And one of the ways that happens is that the lines are very bright in military culture around who does what, when they do it, and how they do it. I think the lines in general are a little less bright in academic culture, and I don't think that academic culture self-regulates itself in quite the same ways. A person can step out of line in an academic culture, or exist out of line entirely for days, months, even years, and may never hear from someone about that, even though people are chafed by their behavior in some way. And so I think it's especially important to help render more visible and render more explicit for military connected students some of the cultural norms of the college environment. Yes, I can already hear my administrator friends saying, "Well, we give out a student handbook. Everything's in the student handbook, everything you need to know." I would argue that that's a fairly ineffective way to educate our students about the culture of our college campuses. I think there are better ways, more productive ways to help students think about this how it all works piece of college life. A lot of this is seemingly elementary stuff. How to address your professor, how to email your professor, how to conduct yourself in an academically integrous way as you do your college coursework. How to ask for help, how to locate and utilize resources. These things that feel kind of foundational, it's just not always clear how best to do them. And so what we really want to do here is we want to make it a little clearer for students what some of the rules are, and how they can best do these things. These softer skills are also a little bit trickier because it's also not obvious to people where to even get this information or how to acquire it. If you fail an exam, it's pretty clear that you have a problem, and it's pretty clear what you say. Professor, hey, I failed this exam. What do I do? But if you're wanting to connect with a professor in office hours, for example, it's not immediately clear how best to gather information about how to do that. It's certainly an awkward proposition to say to your professor, "Hey, professor, I'd like to approach you in office hours, but I don't know how." Right? Or I'd really like to email you, but I'm nervous about what to call you. These are odd conversations, and what that means is that I think it's a little bit harder for students to get this information. I also think there's a little bit of stigma around students not knowing how to do these things already. My student veterans certainly report to me that rather than expose themselves as not knowing how to do some of these things, they just avoid doing them at all. And that's certainly not what we want our student veterans doing. And so, really what we're trying to do in this module is we're trying to help students understand what questions they can ask, what questions they should ask, and then give them some guidance on how best to ask them. I have to say that as I developed this module in collaboration with a committee of student veterans, what I learned is that students are really, really hungry for this stuff, right? Like, nobody wants to mess up. Right? Nobody wants to transgress. Nobody wants to be the person who raises their hand in a class that everyone knows no one raises their hand in. No one wants to participate in a seminar that everyone knows you don't speak up in. I mean, people want to fit in. People want to play by the rules. I think especially our student veterans, they came from environments where they knew the rules. They came from environments where the culture was like the air they breathe. They were breathing. They knew what the expectations were. They knew what was expected of them. They knew how to operate, and they were highly effective. As I've said before, our student veterans are experts at mastering the execution of difficult things. And then we put them in a new environment and we change all the rules, and we don't really give them a place to ask about the new rules. They're just sort of expected to know. I don't think they're just expected to know in the military in the ways that we just expect them to know somehow in school. I had a student once tell me he felt kind of amphibious, right? That he was in the water, and then going to college was like walking up on dry land without a whole lot of guidance on how to do that successfully. So, I think students want to get it right. And we want to help them get it right. We want to help them get it right. We want to give them a resource where they can ask these questions, get some information before they tackle the thing they're trying to tackle. Now, what I'd like to do here for the remainder of this podcast is just walk you through the sort of sub areas of this larger topic, because I think there are just a couple things I want to say to help add some context to the pieces that we have highlighted in this curriculum. And again, obviously the hidden curriculum is a massive thing. The hidden curriculum is, in some way, it's so ethereal. It's like a sense that people have of what kind of a place a college is, and a sort of intuitive sense of how it operates. That's a hard thing to pin down in an online curriculum. And it's certainly the case that we have not excavated every piece of it, but in collaboration with our student veterans, we think we've hit on some hot topics. And the first is this idea of the hidden curriculum that we've just been talking about. It's kind of an extraordinary pedagogical moment for me when I talk about this and I see students' faces light up as they realize that this nagging sense that they have had, that there's a set of rules that they're supposed to know how to abide by, but they don't know them yet. When they realize that this sort of persistent feeling that they have, that everyone knows what to do and they don't, is a thing. There's a thing that we call it, that educators and higher education professionals have a term for precisely this feeling that students have but don't necessarily want to admit to. When students find out that intuition that they have, or that sense that they have, has a name, and that there are articles and books written about it, I think it's extraordinarily sort of vindicating for them. Really, really reassuring that what they've been sensing or what they've been experiencing is not just some sort of figment of their imagination. It is a real, observable phenomenon that people talk about, have discussions about, and as we do here, try to mitigate for students. So calling that out is, I think, important. And that's really one of the things we're trying to do in this module in general, is just call this thing out, right? The hidden curriculum is precisely what it is because it's hidden. We want to drag it out of hiding, call it what it is, put it on the table, dissect it, identify its constituent parts, and then start to walk through them and talk through them and think through them in a systematic way. Sometimes when you give something a name, you can have some power over it. The second thing we do is we talk about academic integrity, and this is just as important as it possibly can be. Standards, protocols, procedures, rules and regulations around academic integrity are complicated. They're sort of overwhelming by nature, I think. They're also intensely local, meaning that rules, regulations, and expectations around academic integrity can morph and change and transform professor by professor, class by class. That means that students have to not only sort of understand the larger culture of academic integrity, but also master specific cultures of academic integrity that exist within specific courses or under the tutelage of specific instructors. And the stakes are high. If you violate an academic integrity policy on a college campus, you're going to face some consequences that are substantial and that are meaningful. And nobody wants to face those consequences. Nobody wants to commit academic dishonesty. For the most part, people aren't trying to do that. And so we really want to help students understand what this is. It's also important for them to realize that that this can be done. Plagiarism, cheating, inappropriate collaboration can be done on accident as well as on purpose. That sort of blows students' minds a little bit, makes them a little nervous. I think it's intuitive for them that you can cheat on purpose, but to cheat by accident through inappropriate collaboration or unauthorized collaboration or writing in a particular way that doesn't conform with expectations can land you in some hot water even when it wasn't your intention. And so we want to make sure that students understand these things, one, and two, know where to get more information on their particular campus or with their particular professor. The next two modules are about interacting with faculty. The first is about really interacting with faculty in office hours, in class, and sort of in person. And the next area is sort of virtual interaction with faculty, primarily email etiquette. I think that our veteran students are underconnected to their faculty. I think students in general are underconnected to their faculty, which is a real shame because I think that connections with faculty are among the most valuable things you can take away from a college education. The faculty are the folks who are going to support you not only in college but after college when they sort of circle the wagons around you to help you enter the workforce or to support you as you pursue additional higher education. And so the fact that our students are underconnected is unfortunate. And I think the reason that they are, especially for our military connected students, is it's not immediately obvious how to connect. Their relationships are the relationships that our military connected students had with their superiors were in most cases a little different than the kinds of relationships they'll have with their professor. The norms around communicating with and interacting with superiors are different in the military than they are in the academy. And so we want to make sure that students have a really clear sense of what that looks like and how they are expected to act, how they should feel free to act. The idea that they might walk into a professor's office hours without an explicit question, but just to have a kind of exploratory conversation or even an introductory one is not intuitive to some of our students, and we want to make sure that they understand that those things are possible. In our section on email etiquette, I can't tell you how many questions I field. It feels like daily about email etiquette. What do I call my professor in an email? How long should my emails be? If my professor signs an email off JT, is that implicit permission to call him or her JT? Once I write to a professor, how long should I wait before following up if I don't hear from them? How many emails is acceptable in a given semester, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These minutiae, all of these distinctions, I think, create a lot of noise for students, and we want to help amplify the signal within that noise and give them some guidance, a kind of trail of breadcrumbs, if you like, through the forest of email communication with faculty and administrators. The final area of this module that I think in some ways is the most important of all of them is the area on asking for help. I'm going to paint with a broad brush here, and I'm going to make a generalization that I recognize as a generalization, but I think it's a useful one. I'm sure what I'm about to say is not true of every military culture. I'm sure it's not true of the culture on every base or every installation, but based on what I hear from my student veterans, it is the sort of consensus, I think, among military connected students that in the military, during their active military service, they didn't always feel welcome and or encouraged to ask for help. Asking for help, they perceived asking for help as a risky endeavor. I'm not suggesting that it was in fact a risky endeavor, but most of my veteran students felt or perceived asking for help as a risky endeavor. They they perceived it as something that would be interpreted as an exhibition of weakness. They perceived it as something that would be interpreted as exposing themselves as somehow sort of subpar or malfunctional. They perceived it as something that would be interpreted as an admission of incompetence or underperformance. This is what I hear over and over again from my students about the culture of asking for help in the military. I have a student veteran who put it quite directly. I said, how would you characterize asking for help in the military? And his answer was immediate and it was crystal clear. He said, RJ, if you could avoid asking for help, you did. If you could avoid asking for help, either as an individual or as a team, you did everything in your power to avoid it. You avoided asking for help at all costs for a variety of reasons. And that's hard for these students as they enter an academic environment, because as educators and higher education professionals, you all know that conceiving of asking for help as something you avoid if at all possible is the antithesis or is anathema to how we want our students to think about asking for help. We want our students to think about asking for help as something that good students do. We want students to think about asking for help not just as something that you do when you're in distress or when you need help. Of course, that is one moment when you would do that. But we also want students to think about asking for help as something that good students do, that students who excel, they ask for help. Competitive students, they ask for help. Students who are naturally curious, students who love being students, students who love to learn for the sake of learning, students who are trying to turn their B pluses into A minuses and their A minuses into A's. These are students who ask for help early, often, and proactively. And what we really want as educators is we want students to understand asking for help as a core tenet of a good learning practice. And so one of the things we try to do in this area, and I think throughout the module, is try to help our military connected students shed or release themselves from any resonant idea that asking for help is somehow an admission of weakness, or is somehow frowned upon, or is something that students should avoid if at all possible. Instead, we want them to think of asking for help as a natural and organic part of being a good student, and of doing the work of learning new things. If you're struggling or if you need help, that means you're learning. That means you're learning. And we receive help and ask for help in all kinds of different ways at a university. When we sit in lecture, we're receiving help from the professor. When we sit in office hours, when we work in groups, we're receiving help from our colleagues and we are helping our colleagues. And so we want students to understand that academia should be understood as an environment of giving and receiving help of various kinds to learn new things. those are sort of the topics we cover. You'll notice that the material is quite general, and that's because we can't speak with any authority about the culture of help at your specific institution or the hidden curricula at your specific institution. Nobody knows your institution better than you do. So what we're really trying to do instead is we're trying to help students. I think this is probably the largest learning objective of this section. Help students identify questions that they may not even know they can ask. Help them identify questions that are appropriate, questions that are permissible, questions that are possible. What kinds of questions can I ask about what kinds of things, and which areas of campus culture should I be focused on, especially if I'm new or if I'm not particularly familiar with a college environment. So one, to identify those questions, and then two, trying to help them ask them in the most productive ways. Because culture is an undeniable fact of being at a university. It's an undeniable fact of being anywhere, but I think it's especially prevalent at a university. And you know what? You may not be able to see the culture of a place, but man, can you feel it. And I think our students, they have a profound sense that there are ways that institutions operate, and we want to help them see what those are, and figure out how to work next to or within those structures. As always, there are just a couple questions I'd like you to keep in your mind as you engage this material. The first is, how would you characterize the culture of help at your institution? How are you socializing students to think about help, and how are you helping them or empowering them to ask for the kinds of help that they need? And I also want you to think a little bit about the hidden curriculum at your campus or your campus culture. How are you socializing students to that hidden curriculum? How are you making what's implicit, ways of doing things, ways of speaking, ways of interacting, ways of comporting yourself? How are you making those implicit things more explicit to students? How are you making things that are largely invisible visible to them? And how do you help them wrestle with and tackle and get their hands around this thing called culture, that is both all around us all the time and is yet something we have a hard time actually touching? And second, as always in the facilitator engagement, I want you to cast your mind back on the challenge that you brought with you to the text, to the class, or the goal that you're trying to achieve through our work in the engagement. And take a look at this information in this module and ask yourself, is there any of this material that might be helpful to you as you address your challenge or try to achieve your goal? If you had to come up with a concrete plan of attack to stage an intervention to either address your challenge or solve your problem or achieve your goal, are there pieces of this that could be useful to you in some way? Another way to phrase this question: how might you take pieces of this curriculum and generate impact on your campus, at your institution, for your military-connected students?